Yang Ye's state alarmed Snowy. Snowy hurried over to him when she saw him like this and hugged him. Yang Ye's body was still trembling, but he didn't go berserk. A short while later, he closed his eyes slowly and rubbed Snowy's head. "Don't be afraid." Snowy glanced at him. While he looked very terrifying, his eyes were clear. He hadn't lost himself. Yang Yi took Snowy out of the cultivation looked up at the sky, and sighed softly. It wasn't a state he could just enter as he pleased. He was utterly incapable of entering the state without sufficient rage. However, once he did enter that state, his strength would improve by practically 10 times. Fortunately, he was someone he was easily enraged. Yang Yi fell silent as he looked at the distant sky. Enemies. He noticed that his enemies weren't limited to the people of the end world. It included that form of destiny too. A short while later, Yang Yi looked down at Snowy and spoke softly. "How did you survive?" She had been stabbed by justice. Yet now, Snowy was completely fine and well. Snowy blinked and waved her paws swiftly. She was very excited. A short while, Yang Yi understood what she meant. After she turned ethereal, her body condensed into form once more. Yes. Even she didn't know how her dispersed body could condense into form once more. To put it in simpler terms, she seemed impossible to kill. That was what Yang Yi thought of it. But it was normal. After all, Snowy had once been the good sprite of this entire universe. And even Destiny's main body hadn't been able to kill her. So long as spirit energy existed, and so long as she hadn't been destroyed by absolute strength, she was impossible to kill. Of course, it didn't represent that she was invincible. The little fellow was very weak when it came to battle. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts, rubbed Snowy's head, and left the primordial pagoda. At this moment, he was in a pitch-black vortex, and the destiny dimension had collapsed. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and vanished on the spot. He used Great Unknown to teleport to the 9th layer of space. His objective was to look for Qi Bitian and Tianxiu. He had to locate them as soon as possible, especially before the main body of the strongest form of destiny gets to them. Moreover, he had to avoid the experts of the end world now. If he wanted to get to the outer area of the 4-dimensional universe, he had to go up there through the 9th layer of space. Because he wasn't able to use Great Unknown to force his way through the spatial walls between the 3-dimensional universe and 4-dimensional universe, nor did he dare to try. What if he was teleported to a bad place? Yang Yi glanced at the 9th layer of space. It was empty and completely devoid of any signs of life. He looked up and was about to leave when he suddenly looked to the side. A woman was walking over slowly. No, it wasn't actually a woman. Yang Yi was astounded. The figure before him was Yin Yang Goddess, who had gone to the end world with him. There was surprise on her face when she saw Yang Yi. Obviously, she hadn't expected to meet him here. Yang Yi smiled. "Long time no see, senior." She sized up Yang Yi and said, "Tisk tsk. Amazing. You've actually grown to such an extent in this short amount of time." Yang Yi smiled and looked up at the sky. He said, "Senior, are you interested in going above the 9th layer of space?" Yin Yang Goddess' eyes narrowed slightly, and then she gazed at the Great Unknown in Yang Ye's grasp. "No wonder. You have Great Unknown. I didn't expect the rumors to be true. You're really on Destiny's side." She had a slightly strange look in her eyes when she gazed at Yang Yi again. She'd been hunted by Destiny on many occasions in the past. Yang Yi thought for a moment and said, "You may be a woman, you're countless times better than many men." She was slightly stunned and asked, "Why do you say that?" Yang Yi explained, "Firstly, you're not a hypocrite, unlike some people who act one way in front of you and another way behind your back. Secondly, you know I'm on Destiny's side, but you didn't attack me. Obviously, you differentiate clearly between good and bad." Yin Yang Goddess glanced at Yang Yi. "I know you're trying to flatter me, but just as you've said, destiny is destiny, and you are you. You can't be considered as one. Moreover, I'm not the type to bully the young when I can't triumph over the older generation. But," she glanced indifferently at him, "you're absolutely sly and full of tricks. So, I won't get myself mixed up with you, and I won't stop you from leaving the 9th layer of space. Xianxia asked, Senior, you're not coming? She shook her head. I have a feeling that no good will come from staying with you. Xianxia felt speechless. He didn't say anything else and just turned around with the intent to leave. Suddenly, Yin-Yang Goddess said, Hey! Xianxia stopped and gazed at her, and she spoke indifferently. Let me warn you that the outside world isn't very safe. It may be more dangerous than it is here. Xianxia nodded. I know. However, as far as I'm concerned, there are no safe places. Right? Yin-Yang Goddess nodded. True. Good luck then. Xianxia smiled. See you next time. Xianxia shot up into the air on his sword. Yin-Yang Goddess glanced up at the space above, and then shook her head. She turned around and walked off into the distance, but she suddenly stopped right after taking a few steps. She looked ahead, and the space 300 m away from her trembled. A moment later, a man in a robe walked out from there. He glanced at her and asked, Has Xianxia been here? Yin-Yang Goddess shook her head. I don't know. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and then the space before him rippled. Yin-Yang Goddess' expression changed slightly. She pressed her palms together and pushed them forward. Boom! The space in front of her rippled in a strange arc. At the same time, the man tapped his right foot down. Bang! The space before her exploded apart, and she was pushed around 3 kilometers back. She wiped off the blood on the corner of her mouth and said, Amazing! The man glanced at her and looked up at the space above them. You're quite fast. His figure shot up into the space above them. The entire 9th layer of space trembled. A few breaths of time after he left, another group appeared here. It was Hung Wangu's group. Hung Wangu glanced upward, and then he gazed at Yin-Yang Goddess. Mr. Yin-Yang, long time no see. Yin-Yang Goddess replied indifferently. Hung Wangu, all of you are truly formidable. So many of you are actually going after a single junior. A junior? Hung Wangu shook his head. You must be joking. Xianxia is no junior. Even I am not confident in being able to defeat him in single combat. Yin-Yang Goddess fell silent. Actually, she had sensed danger from Xianxia just now. Meanwhile, Hung Wangu suddenly said, Mr. Yin-Yang, according to my knowledge, you were hunted by destiny in the past too. So why don't you join our undertaking? She glanced at Hung Wangu. You're really targeting destiny. Hung Wangu smiled and remained silent. Yin-Yang Goddess fell silent for a short while and said, I won't interfere in your business. She turned around and walked away. First God's eyes narrowed slightly and was about to attack, but Hung Wangu stopped him. Just like that, Yin-Yang Goddess vanished before their view. First God suddenly said, Brother Wangu, why aren't we killing her to put an end to all potential troubles? Hung Wangu shook his head. That will just make us even more enemies. Our mission is to gather more people on our side, not kill those who refuse to side with us. If we do that, many experts will feel aversion, and they may even oppose us. So, we don't have to look for trouble with anyone who doesn't help Xianxia. First God glanced at Hung Wangu and remained silent. Hung Wangu looked up. Do you think Emperor Li can kill him? First God fell silent for a moment and said, If even he can't kill Xianxia in single combat. First God didn't finish the sentence. The surroundings fell silent. A long time passed before Hung Wangu said, Then let's wait and see. He looked at Zhumu and continued, Have you found Yang Busi's exact location? Zhumu nodded. I have. Hung Wangu nodded. Let's go meet that peerless figure who reigned supreme over the ancient times. He vanished on the spot with the others. Far away in space, Xianxia shot up swiftly on his sword. He was so fast that space was being torn open in his wake. At this moment, he was in a spatial passageway. He'd forcibly cut a passageway open through space. He was madly slashing the space here in the 9th layer to get out of it. In other words, he was cutting his way to the border of the 4-dimensional universe. Xianxia didn't use past life or great unknown this time. He wanted to rely on his own strength to charge out of the 3-dimensional universe. So it was extremely difficult. It wasn't that difficult in the beginning, but he gradually started feeling a little powerless. The deeper he went, the more terrifying the strength of the space there was. Even his sword was barely able to do anything to the space there. But that wasn't even the main point. The main point was that the space around him had started to counterattack. Countless strands of spatial energy had started to press down upon him and were surging toward him like a torrent. A solemn expression appeared on Yang Ye's face. Suddenly, Yang Yi turned around, and a man had suddenly appeared out of thin air there. The man wore a robe. He glanced at Yang Yi and was about to speak when Yang Yi suddenly swung his sword at the man. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. An unpredictable fellow? The middle-aged man hadn't expected Yang Yi to immediately attack. As far as he was concerned, a chat before the fight was absolutely necessary, wasn't it? However, Yang Yi had immediately attacked. While it has exceeded his expectations a little, the middle-aged man's reaction was extremely swift. As soon as Yang Ye's sword arrived before him, he'd moved around 30 m back. Yang Ye's attack missed. He was about to attack again when an afterimage shot at him. It was the middle-aged man. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. He moved slightly sideways and swung his sword horizontally. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his sword. A bare hand. At this instant, Yang Yi decisively chose to release his sword, and then another sword appeared in his grasp. No, it was two swords. They were past life and the great unknown. At the same moment, the middle-aged man released the sword and floated 300 m back. At the instant he left, two swords slashed down where he'd been a moment ago. Yang Yi stopped and looked up at the middle-aged man, and there was a solemn expression deep within his eyes. The middle-aged man's combat instinct was terrifying. Yang Yi didn't attack again because the space in the surroundings was pressing down upon him. He wasn't in the 9th layer of space anymore. The middle-aged man sized up Yang Yi. No wonder the end world was willing to pay such a huge price to hire me. You do have some skill. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his right hand slightly and shook it left and right. Boom! The space pressing down upon him on both sides was blasted 3 kilometers backward. Hiss! A moment later, the sound of something being sliced apart resounded. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he tapped his right foot down and transformed into a ray of light that shot forward. Boom! An instant later, a rumbling explosion resounded through the spatial passageway, and then a figure was blasted away. Yang Yi. As soon as he stopped himself over 1 kilometer away, a black shadow shot at him. The middle-aged man refused to give him a chance to catch his breath. Yang Yi closed his eyes slowly, and the swords in his hands started to tremble violently. A moment later, the black shadow arrived. At the same time, Yang Yi opened his eyes. Hiss! 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 In an instant, countless rays of sword energy and sword intent appeared around Yang Yi. The sword domain sphere. Meanwhile, the black shadow didn't stop, and just a moment later, a hand slammed against Yang Ye's sword domain sphere. Boom! Space shook violently and warped. But just a moment later, the space in the surroundings returned to normal, and Yang Yi was over 1 kilometer away. Suppression by absolute strength. Yang Yi wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth. The middle-aged man before him was extremely strong. According to his estimations, he was probably just slightly inferior to the clone of the strongest form of destiny. It was a terrifying thought. It was undeniable that all 4 forms of destiny, especially their strongest form, had far surpassed many experts in the 3-dimensional universe. And if they merged into one, they would be even more terrifying. The middle-aged man looked down at his right hand. There were many bloody cuts on it. Besides that, many remnants of sword energy were raging on his body. He fell silent for an instant, and then he shook his right hand slightly. The sword energy around him instantly vanished without a trace. He glanced coldly at Yang Yi. "You're actually able to injure me." Yang Yi didn't waste his breath. A ray of light instantly arrived before the middle-aged man. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man unfurled his palm and forcibly stopped Yang Ye's sword. However, the powerful force carried within the sword instantly pushed the middle-aged man backward repeatedly. The middle-aged man was about to counterattack when a few flying swords suddenly appeared around him. The 5-element swords. They were like 5 copies of Xianxia, and they shot toward the middle-aged man's weak points. The middle-aged man frowned slightly. He stopped fighting Xianxia in close quarters, and he created over 1 kilometer in distance between himself and Xianxia. Xianxia was just about to attack again when the middle-aged man suddenly closed his eyes slowly, and then he clenched his fists and raised his right leg. Hiss! In an instant, the middle-aged man's body split apart, and then around 10 afterimages shot at Xianxia from different directions. At this moment, Xianxia's expression changed drastically. He didn't give it too much thought and just swung his swords. Dual domain swords. Bang! 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 However, a string of muffled explosions resounded, and Xianxia was pushed at least 300 m back with every one of them. In just a short while, Xianxia had been pushed back by around 3 kilometers. A breath of time later, everything calmed down. The middle-aged man had returned to where he was. He glanced at Xianxia with a wisp of ridicule on the corner of his mouth. "So you're wearing an armor that's a super divine treasure." Xianxia took a deep breath and alleviated the terrible discomfort her felt. At that instant just now, he may have been completely suppressed if he hadn't used the armor. However, even with the armor was severely damaged now. Simply speaking, he couldn't use it to get out of trouble again. Xianxia looked up at the middle-aged man while the latter walked slowly in his direction. A full set of divine treasures. Unfortunately, they are all external sources of strength that mean nothing. Xianxia chuckled. "What the fuck are you talking about? Your god knows how many years older than me, yet I can't even use some treasures? If you're that amazing, why don't you suppress your cultivation and fight me?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "I'm not here to spar with you. I have other things to do once I'm done with you. Of course, I have to admit that I overlooked your age just now. It's absolutely extraordinary that you possess such strength at your age. However, your path ends here." He waved his right hand. Boom! A wave of powerful aura swept out from him. In an instant, the middle-aged man's aura rose rapidly. Couldn't be compared to his previous aura. It was completely different. If his aura was just slightly weaker to the stronger form of Destiny's clone, then he wasn't any weaker to her clone now. Obviously, he hadn't used his full strength earlier. Now, he didn't want to waste more time. Xianxia glanced at the dual swords in his grasp, and then Snowy appeared before him. Xianxia rubbed her head, and she cracked a smile before taking the swords and pushing them together. Just like that, they were merged into one. Once they were merged, Snowy hurried back into the primordial pagoda, and then she frowned as she watched Xianxia. Outside the pagoda, Xianxia glanced at the sword in his grasp. At this moment, he could clearly sense that it was slightly different now. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man suddenly vanished on the spot. A wave of monstrous aura surged through the spatial passageway. Boom! The spatial passageway shook violently like an earthquake was surging through it. Xianxia closed his eyes slowly, and his sword shook violently in his grasp, striking last to subdue the enemy. The middle-aged man grew closer and closer to Xianxia, and a short while later he drew his sword. The middle-aged man swung his fist too. At this moment, there was no technique involved. It was a head-on collision, because the middle-aged man's strength covered the entire area around Xianxia, and his cultivation and strength far surpassed Xianxia. So it could be said that he was just using overwhelming strength to crush Xianxia. Xianxia had no other choice but to go head-on against the middle-aged man. If he retreated, his aura would suffer a blow from that, and then he would fall into a hopeless situation. Moreover, the spatial wall was right behind him, so he had nowhere to retreat. The strength contained in this attack of Xianxia's was much, much stronger than his last attack. His swords were merged now. These swords already surpassed super divine treasures on their own. So now that they were merged as one, the strength it possessed wasn't just a simple 1+1. Moreover, Xianxia was using his dual domains and dual intents. A moment later, the middle-aged man's fist slammed against the tip of Xianxia's sword. Xianxia's sword shook violently, but the sword stabbed into the middle-aged man's arm, and it just continued forward all the way. A vicious glow flashed through the middle-aged man's eyes. He didn't retreat and continued his charge. He allowed the sword to pierce through his body, but his fist slammed against Yang Ye's chest. Bang! The armor Yang Yi wore instantly collapsed, and he was blasted away. Mouthfuls of blood sprayed from Yang Yi as he flew through the air. In the end, he slammed against the spatial wall behind him. Boom! Yang Yi fell on his back, but it only took a moment for him to be on his feet again. His stomach had sunken in from the impact. If the armor hadn't stopped some of the impact, that punch would have gone through his body. It could be said that the armor had saved his life. The middle-aged man glanced at his pierced right arm, and then he just cut it off, because the past life energy within Yang Ye's sword remained in that arm of his, and it was madly devouring him. If he didn't give up that arm, he may even lose his life. The middle-aged man looked up at Yang Yi. I almost made a mistake. As soon as he finished speaking, his right arm started growing rapidly. An invisible wave of pressure appeared out of thin air above Yang Yi. Yang Yi closed his eyes slowly while holding tight to the sword in his right hand. His body gradually started to tremble, and his hair slowly turned red, bit by bit. The sword Dao of hatred, or to put it in simpler terms, the demonic sword Dao. It was actually part of the devil path. Right when Yang Yi was about to full enter that state. I'm here. A voice suddenly resounded in Yang Ye's ears. A familiar voice. Yang Yi stopped and looked over. There was a woman standing to his right. A Nanjing. It was a Nanjing who had been gone for quite some time. Yang Yi was stunned for a moment, and then he cracked a smile. You're here. And Nanjing nodded and walked over to Yang Ye's side. Both of them gazed at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man sized up a Nanjing, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Meanwhile, they didn't waste their breath and just vanished on the spot. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly. He overlapped his hands and slammed them forward. The space before him cracked open and was obliterated. Meanwhile, a spear tore through space and arrived before him. Dagger axe. A Nanjing's dagger axe stabbed directly against the man's palm, but it couldn't pierce through his palm. The middle-aged man had forcefully stopped it. Moreover, dagger axe instantly curved. However, the middle-aged man's pupils suddenly constricted. He hurriedly pulled his hands back because a sword had soundlessly arrived behind him. The middle-aged man reacted very quickly. He pressed his arms together and clamped down on the sword, but a spear stabbed at him from behind. A ferocious expression appeared on his face as he released the sword and flashed 300 m away. However, a strand of blood sprayed from his left shoulder. As soon as the middle-aged man stopped there, Yang Yi and a Nanjing were in front of him. The sword stabbed forward. The spear swept horizontally, and Nanjing and Yang Ye's figures crisscrossed incessantly. In an instant, the middle-aged man was surrounded by countless spear and sword images. Suppression. Utter suppression. At this moment, the middle-aged man couldn't even fight back. In the younger generation, a Nanjing was probably the only one capable of fighting Yang Yi in closed-quartered combat. She was the only one who was on par with him and even surpassed him. Now, a Nanjing had returned even stronger than before. Her joint forces with Yang Yi. The middle-aged man was pushed back repeatedly. In just around 10 breaths of time, countless sword and spear injuries had appeared all around him. However, the middle-aged man's strength was clearly extremely terrifying. While more and more injuries were appearing on him, they weren't lethal. Just like that, around 10 minutes passed. Suddenly, the middle-aged man gave up defending himself against the spear striking his chest. The spear pierced through him. At practically the exact same moment, a sword sliced at his throat. The middle-aged man ignored the sword because as soon as the spear struck him, he'd relied on the force within it to retreat rapidly. His retreat allowed him to dodge Yang Ye's attack while creating distance between him and them. Once he'd retreated, the middle-aged man turned around and vanished on the spot. He'd fled decisively, and Nanjing was about to pursue him, but Yang Yi shook his head. She gazed at him, and he said softly, We can't catch up to him. And Nanjing nodded and looked into the distance. A black shadow had appeared there. She spoke softly. Thank you. It was the black shadow that had gotten her here. The black shadow spoke softly. You have to go down the rest of your path on your own. She gazed at it, and it grinned. Actually, I'm very satisfied already. The black shadow gazed at Yang Yi and continued. Actually, I should thank you. Yang Yi was quite puzzled. The black shadow explained. I wouldn't have been able to get out without you. Yang Yi finally understood. Snowy and Arya had gotten the black shadow out that day, and the woman in black hadn't stopped them. In the beginning, he thought the black shadow and the woman in black were on the same side, but now it would seem like the black shadow seemed to be aware of what Yang Yi was thinking and said, We aren't enemies. After all, we have a greatest enemy then. However, we aren't friends either. Be careful of the strongest form of destiny. She has the most extreme thoughts, and her strength is the most terrifying. Yang Busi was unmatched in the world, yet lost to her in the end. Haha. Actually, practically everyone from our era lost at her hands. Yang Yi spoke solemnly. How terrifying would she be if they merged into one? The black shadow fell silent for a moment and said, She had completely surpassed the heaven Tao then. Now that so many years have passed, and all her clones have been cultivating on their own. It's a cultivation technique of hers that she created herself. He shook his head slightly and said, Actually, she is very mysterious even to us. All I do know is that countless challenged her all those years ago, but all of us failed. Yang Yi fell silent. The shadow continued. All 4 forms of destiny have their own personality. Now it seems like the women in white and black think highly of you, but 2 and the last one are existences you must be careful of, especially their strongest form. Yang Yi nodded. Thank you for the reminder. The shadow gazed at Nanjing. My path was at its end all those years ago, and I hope you can go further than me. His figure gradually turned ethereal. And Nanjing bowed respectfully like a disciple as she stood by Yang Ye's side. A breath of time later, the black shadow had vanished completely. Truly vanished. Yang Yi gazed at Nanjing, and she fell silent for a long time before she gazed at him. Where are you going? Yang Yi looked toward the distance, the border of the 4-dimensional universe. She nodded and entered the primordial pagoda. In the primordial pagoda, Snowy appeared before her. Snowy cracked a smile at Nanjing, but Nanjing remained indifferent. Snowy was a little afraid. Suddenly, she rubbed Snowy's head and went to the cultivation room. Snowy blinked, and then she quickly followed Nanjing. Nanjing was still the same. Outside the primordial pagoda, Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings. In the end, he fell silent for a long time and said, Maybe we shouldn't go there for now? And Nanjing appeared before him. Yang Yi spoke softly. 2 bullies me. The strongest form of destiny bullied me. And all of these bastards are bullying me too. I feel like a ball that all of them can just kick around. He gazed at her and said, I feel increasingly furious the more I think about it. And Nanjing nodded. Kill them. Yang Yi took a deep breath. All of them think I will run, but I'm not going to do that. Come, let's go kill them all. Yang Yi took her hand and traveled downward. In the primordial pagoda, Snowy gazed at the shattered armor, blinked, and then touched it gently. A moment later, countless strands of spirit energy converged into it, and then it actually started to heal. If the middle-aged man from before witnessed this scene, he would probably have an interesting reaction to it. Snowy was like a mender. No, she was one, and she was the best in the world. In just a short while, the shattered armor had been fully repaired. Now it was truly like new. Once she finished mending it, Snowy hurried out of the pagoda with it and passed it to Yang Yi while her chubby face was covered in a brilliant smile. And Nanjing and Yang Yi exchanged glances, and they saw smiles in each other's eyes. Yang Yi took the armor and passed it to her, but she shook her head. Yang Yi insisted, but she insisted as well. Yang Yi felt quite helpless. And Nanjing spoke softly. They are targeting you, so it may be useful at the critical moment for you. She glanced at Yang Yi and continued, Wear it. Yang Yi didn't linger on the topic. He took the armor and gazed at Snowy with a smile. "Little fellow, you're amazing." He was speaking from the heart. Snowy's abilities were truly extraordinary. Fortunately, Snowy was on his side. Snowy gazed at Yang Yi, and her smile grew even wider. Yang Yi chuckled, and then he took Snowy in his arms before vanishing from the spatial passageway with a Nanjing. It was difficult to head upward, but it was very easy to travel down. In just a short while, they'd returned to the 9th layer of space. And Nanjing asked softly, "What do we do?" He glanced at the surroundings and grinned. "It's time to make them learn." He withdrew a transmission rock, sent his profound energy into it, and then a voice came from within it. "Brother Yang." Yang Yi nodded slightly. "Where are they living after I destroyed the end world?" The voice fell silent for a short while and asked, "You plan to counterattack?" Yang Yi nodded. "Sort of." The voice fell silent for a moment. In the end, a ray of white light flashed out of the transmission rock. "They are still there. They repaired the shattered space there. However, they have many, many more formations there now. All of them were set up by old geezers who are skilled in the art of formations. You must be careful." "Formations?" Yang Yi was stunned for a moment, and then he gazed at Snowy and shook his head while smiling. "It seems I have to be careless." As he spoke, he vanished on the spot with Snowy and a Nanjing. The end dimension. A short while later, Yang Yi and Snowy arrived at the end world. He just entered directly. As for a Nanjing, she didn't show herself. She was a trump card that was best used at the critical moment. As soon as Yang Yi arrived, his arrival alarmed the experts of the end world, and then countless auras swept over from all directions. At the same time, a huge formation soundlessly appeared below him. Meanwhile, the stars in space actually automatically started to move. Formations. Moreover, there were at least around 10 of them that had activated swiftly. They activated simultaneously, and they could even annihilate a peak Destiny Realm expert with ease. Yang Yi walked toward the distance with Snowy in his arms. He glanced at the surroundings and smiled. "I heard you repaired this place. Right? Don't get anxious. I always win people over with virtue." Yang Yi suddenly vanished on the spot once he finished speaking. Around 1 kilometer to the left, a black shadow shot toward the sky, but the ray of sword energy was faster than him. Hiss! The sword energy flashed through the black shadow's throat. The sword energy dispersed to reveal Yang Ye's figure behind the black shadow. Yang Yi sheathed his sword and lightly lifted up the black shadow's head. Just like that, it was lifted up. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. Yang Yi glanced at the head in his grasp and sighed softly. "Sorry. I wasn't able to control myself. Sigh. I wonder when I'll be able to fix my tendency to kill." Yang Yi casually tossed the head to the ground and looked up. At this moment, strands of stellar energy were converging incessantly above him. It wasn't just up there. Countless formations had been activated below him. Formations. The end world clearly planned to kill him with formations. Even if they couldn't kill him, they wanted to trap him with them. Yang Yi naturally understood that. He gazed at Snowy, and she nodded slightly. She looked up while the sprite staff appeared in her grasp. She raised it and waved it gently. Just like that, the sky shook violently, and then countless experts watched with shock as the formations started to collapse. It wasn't just up there. The formations down below started to collapse as well. The experts throughout the end world were stunned. What the heck? Suddenly, Yang Yi said, "Snowy, can you make the formations attack them instead?" Snowy blinked, and then she looked up at the sky. A moment later, she waved her paws swiftly. The formations started to circulate under Snowy's control, but they weren't circulating normally. They were in chaos. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings. His intuition told him that something was off. However, Snowy grew increasingly excited as she played with the formations. A short while later, the formations grew increasingly chaotic, or it should be said that the spirit energy within them was chaotic. No matter what formation it was, they required spirit energy to be sustained. But what was Snowy good at? Managing spirit energy. Since she controlled spirit energy to a certain extent, she controlled the formations too. But did Snowy know how to use formations? No, she didn't. She didn't understand them at all, and she was just controlling them randomly. Of course, others thought that she was serious. Even Xianxia felt that Snowy was really controlling them in the beginning. But it didn't take long for him to realize that Snowy was just controlling them randomly. Xianxia was about to ask Snowy about it when she suddenly lowered the sprite staff. Boom! In an instant, the formations in the sky exploded apart, and even the formations below them exploded. The powerful impact from the explosion instantly swept out to the surroundings. Xianxia's face changed drastically while Snowy was quite stunned as well. She gazed at Xianxia, and Xianxia immediately grabbed her and fled. Xianxia wasn't the only one. The others throughout the end world started fleeing madly. The huge explosion Snowy created wasn't just a detonation of the formations. There were countless strands of spirit energy there to support the explosions. Otherwise, if it had been just the formations alone, they would have been able to resist the explosions and even suppress it. However, if the explosions were supported by spirit energy, then the force of the explosions was too terrifying. Everyone fled, including Xianxia. It didn't take long for the end world to start being obliterated inch by inch. This time, it wasn't just the end world that was being destroyed, even the end dimension was affected. Xianxia held Snowy far away in outer space and gazed at the end world that was a pitch-black hole now. He felt a sense of lingering fear. If he hadn't fled in time and allowed himself to be struck by the force of the explosion, then even if he survived, he would have suffered severe injuries. Snowy had an innocent expression on her face as she sat there in Xianxia's arms and looked off into the distance. Xianxia glanced at Snowy and shook his head. The little fellow didn't seem to have any idea what danger was. What was danger? What was it? Snowy was just too oblivious. Xianxia restrained his thoughts, rubbed Snowy's head gently, and looked into the distance. A moment later, he grinned. A sword howl resounded. Kill. He was naturally not here to have fun, he was here to kill. He knew that it was very risky and impulsive, but being hunted for so long was too aggrieving. A ray of sword energy surged through space while frequently leaving shrill cries in its wake. Xianxia was hunting them down. A ray of sword energy flashed. The body of a Destiny Realm expert exploded apart behind it. The sword energy dispersed to reveal Xianxia's figure. Xianxia stopped attacking. He just looked to the side, and a group appeared there. It was Hung Wangu's group. Hung Wangu was in the lead. Xianxia saw more than Hung Wangu. He saw Mou, Zhuamu, First God, and the middle-aged man who'd pursued him into the spatial passageway. The middle-aged man was Emperor Li. Hung Wangu glanced at the end world and spoke softly. I didn't expect you to come as soon as we rebuilt it. Haha, we're really such failures. He gazed at Xianxia's stomach. Moreover, we're absolute fools. We know you have the good sprite, yet we actually tried to use formations against you. How foolish of us. Snowy. The entire end world had overlooked the little fellow because they felt that she was just a cute little fellow who was completely harmless. That was why the end world had overlooked her. However, at this moment, they realized that the little fellow may be more terrifying than Xianxia. Hung Wangu restrained his thoughts and gazed at Xianxia. Since you dared to come here, you should have other trump cards besides that woman, right? Xianxia smiled. Go figure. Hung Wangu shook his head and smiled. Why should I? However, no matter what you have up your sleeves, you're not leaving here today. He glanced at the others by his side. Attack together. Attack together. He was very well aware that no one could easily defeat Xianxia on their own, especially when that woman was by his side. Their joint forces were even able to defeat Emperor Li. Mou and the others didn't refuse. They were about to attack when a ray of sword energy shot over. Hung Wangu's eyes narrowed slightly, and he looked over. An old man was flying over on his sword, and there was a beautiful woman in a plain robe behind him. Jian Wudi. Hung Wangu's face instantly turned gloomy at the sight of Jian Wudi. Jian Wudi descended by Xianxia's side, and the woman by his side was curiously sizing up Xianxia. Xianxia gazed at Jian Wudi, martial ancestor. Yang Yi had naturally notified Jian Wudi to come here. Since they were going to fight a group battle, he naturally had to summon everyone. Jian Wudi glanced at Yang Yi and nodded slightly. You're much stronger than before. Looks like you had a fortuitous encounter again. Yang Yi smiled, and then he gazed at the woman by Jian Wudi's side. And this senior is? She grinned. I'm a good friend of your martial ancestors. You can call me Qing Xian. Yang Yi hurriedly bowed. Senior Qing Xian. She glanced at Jian Wudi and smiled. He's much more sly than that disciple of yours. Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Jian Wudi glared at Yang Yi and said, Are you confident? Yang Yi shook his head. I'm just giving it my all. Jian Wudi nodded slightly and gazed at Hung Wangu's group. The latter smiled. Looks like there's no need for me to say anything. He gazed at Emperor Li. Brother Li, I'll leave him to you, all right? Emperor Li glanced at Jian Wudi and replied indifferently, All right. He shot up into the air. Hung Wangu gazed at Jian Wudi with a grin on his face. Please go on ahead. Jian Wudi didn't say anything and just shot off after Emperor Li. Hung Wangu gazed at Qing Xian. And you are? Qing Xian smiled. Just send any one of them to fight me. Hung Wangu gazed at First God, and the latter spoke indifferently. Leave her to me. He vanished on the spot with Qing Xian. Mou, Zhuamu, Sky Saber, two other middle-aged men, a woman in palace clothes, and an old man were still by Hung Wangu's side. All of them were peak Destiny Realm experts. Besides that, there were almost 20 Destiny Realm experts in the surroundings. At least 80% of all the Destiny Realm experts in the universe were here. Practically all the elites of the Endworld were here. Hung Wangu gazed at Yang Yi and smiled. Shall we? Yang Yi cracked a smile and nodded. And then he said, I'm counting on all of you. Hung Wangu's eyes narrowed slightly. A short while later, numerous auras surged down from the sky, and then experts appeared in succession behind Yang Yi. They were led by the Past Life Clan and Martial Sky Clan's Patriarch, and the Yang Clan's Grand Elder. Each of them had brought two other Destiny Realm experts with them. So there were 9 Destiny Realm experts from the 3 clans, and 5 of them were peak Destiny Realm experts. Besides that, Song Mu and Sha Ji were here. Hung Wangu's side clearly had an advantage in both numbers and quality, but the gap wasn't very huge. They had the strength to fight, at least. Hung Wangu glanced at the experts behind Yang Yi and smiled. No wonder, no wonder. Yang Yi glanced at Hung Wangu. Kill them. It's best if you can kill them all. He vanished on the spot once he finished speaking. Zhuamu suddenly stepped forward. However, a figure flashed out of Yang Yi. It was a Nanjing. And Nanjing locked onto Zhuamu, and her spear shot straight for him. Zhuamu frowned slightly and swung his saber. Bang! And Nanjing and Zhuamu instantly split apart, and they were pushed around 1 kilometer back each. A moment later, and Nanjing charged forward again. Meanwhile, Yang Yi had appeared before Hung Wangu. The latter gazed indifferently at Yang Yi, and he tapped his right index and middle fingers forward when Yang Ye's sword descended at him. It tapped right against the top of Yang Ye's sword. Yang Ye's sword shook violently, and Yang Yi was blasted 300 m back. Meanwhile, Hung Wangu remained on the spot. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. He felt that he'd underestimated Hung Wangu a little. Hung Wangu placed his left hand behind his back and walked slowly in Yang Ye's direction. Your sword is very strong, and so are you. Come. Let us continue. Continue. Yang Yi cracked a smile, and then he charged at Hung Wangu again. His powerful sword energy could slice through anything. Hung Wangu stopped moving, and then his feet slid slightly to opposite sides. He squatted partially there and swung a punch. It caused the space before him to collapse. Once space collapsed, the powerful force of the explosion and the energy within his fist instantly blasted Yang Yi and his sword away. They flew over 3 kilometers away. Yang Yi glanced at his right hand once he stopped there. His right hand had cracked open completely, and blood was seeping out incessantly from it. Overwhelming strength. Yang Yi took a deep breath and glanced at the surroundings. The others were already in battle. and it seemed like the end world had the upper hand, because they had more experts, and their peak and ordinary Destiny Realm experts were much more numerous than the experts on Yang Ye's side. He couldn't delay. Yang Yi looked up. Meanwhile, Hung Wangu suddenly took a step forward. He instantly arrived before Yang Yi. A punch. Another punch. It was going straight for Yang Ye's head. The power within it was sufficient to obliterate the world. The power within it was telling Yang Yi that all techniques were useless before it. Yang Yi closed his eyes slowly while his sword merged into one. Past life and great unknown had merged into one. Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes. At the instant he opened his eyes, his entire figure turned blood red. At the same time, an extremely terrifying aura of the Sword Dao erupted from Yang Yi. The demonic Sword Dao. Yang Yi had entered that state again. Yang Yi swung his sword with both hands. Boom! Hung Wangu's attack was instantly dispersed. At the same time, Hung Wangu was blasted over 1 kilometer away. At this moment, countless experts gazed at Yang Yi. Their expression changed when they noticed the aura he emanated. At this moment, Yang Ye's aura wasn't something a peak Destiny Realm expert could compare to. Did he take something? All of them were filled with questions. Hung Wangu glanced at his hand. There was an extremely deep injury on his fist, and if it went just a little deeper, the attack would have sliced his fist into two. Hung Wangu looked up at Yang Yi. I underestimated you. No, your strength exceeded my expectations. Yang Yi didn't waste his breath and just charged forward. Hiss! Everywhere he passed, space was instantly sliced into bits. Hung Wangu frowned slightly. Meanwhile, a sword arrived before him, and he pressed his elbows together to clamp down on it. The sword descended. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then Hung Wangu was blasted over 1 kilometer away again. As soon as he stopped himself, Yang Yi was in front of him again, and another slash descended upon him. Hung Wangu unfurled his right fist and slapped it upward. Boom! A wave of energy surged upward and slammed against Yang Ye's sword. However, the energy failed to stop Yang Ye's sword, and it still descended. Bam! Hung Wangu was blasted away once more. Yang Yi charged over again. Hung Wangu's eyes narrowed slightly as he raised both hands. In an instant, a golden shield appeared around him, and a golden statue around 30 m tall appeared behind him. Meanwhile, Yang Yi arrived. Hung Wangu pressed his palms together and slammed them forward. Boom! A wave of golden energy suddenly swept out of his palms, and they forcefully stopped Yang Ye's sword. Meanwhile, Hung Wangu suddenly relaxed his palms and allowed Yang Ye's sword to strike his head. However, at practically the exact same moment, he slammed a punch at Yang Ye's stomach. Bang! Yang Yi was instantly punched away, but Yang Ye's sword failed to slice off Hung Wangu's head, because the latter was enveloped in golden light, and the golden light had forcibly stopped Yang Ye's sword. Of course, he dared to go head-on against Yang Ye's attack mainly because he'd used his full strength to negate most of the energy contained within Yang Ye's attack. Otherwise, he would have never dared to do that. After he punched Yang Yi away, Hung Wangu didn't stop. He immediately charged at Yang Yi. The golden statue suddenly pressed its palms together behind him, and then it pressed its palms forward. Yang Yi looked up at Hung Wangu, and he saw a golden fist slam down at him. A vicious glow flashed through Yang Ye's eyes. He stomped his right foot down and soared up into the air, and then he swung his sword with both hands. The domain sword. Meanwhile, Hung Wangu's punch arrived. Sword and fist collided. Boom! The space around them shook violently, and then they were pushed backward repeatedly. Meanwhile, the golden statue behind Hung Wangu suddenly slammed a punch in Yang Ye's direction. A golden fist descended from the sky. The space around Yang Yi instantly warped before it. Meanwhile, at the center of it all, Yang Yi couldn't even breathe. A lethal feeling of oppression. Yang Yi didn't dare act carefully, and he shot up into the air while holding his sword with both hands. At the same time, a sword chest suddenly appeared on his back. When he arrived just around 3 m before the fist, the sword chest shook behind him, and then 5 swords surged up into the air and stabbed the golden fist. Hiss! 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 All give swords pierced through the fist, but the fist still descended. Meanwhile, the sword in Xianxia's grasp slammed against the first. A moment later, a ray of sword energy shot through the fist. However, as soon as Xiangyi passed through the fist, Heng Wangu appeared before him. The latter had formed a strange seal with both hands, and a strand of golden, profound energy flowed throughout his body. After that, he gently pressed the seal downward. Bang! The space around Xiangyi instantly collapsed, and his figure was blasted over 3 kilometers away. Heng Wangu was about to attack again when 5 swords suddenly shot at the golden statue behind him. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took a step back, and the golden statue behind him moved over 100 m back as well. After that, it pressed its palms together. Boom! A ray of golden light rippled out through space, and Yang Ye's swords were instantly blasted away. Meanwhile, Yang Yi appeared before Heng Wangu. At the same time, a few rays of sword energy enveloped the latter. Hiss! 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 Sword energy crisscrossed around Heng Wangu. However, the sword energy wasn't able to pierce through the golden shield around him. However, cracks gradually appeared on the golden shield. A few breaths of time later, along with the descent of Yang Ye's sword, the golden shield shattered into bits, but at the instant that happened, Heng Wangu pushed forward and slammed a punch against Yang Ye's chest. Bam! Yang Yi was instantly blasted away, but at the instant he flew away, he swung his sword and slashed off half of Heng Wangu's right arm. Yang Yi stopped far away in the distance, and as soon as he did that, a ray of sword energy suddenly appeared behind him. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly as he turned around swiftly. A figure had arrived behind him. It was Mou. Hiss! A sword stabbed Yang Ye's chest, but it failed to stab through, because Yang Ye's armor appeared once more. Meanwhile, a wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of Mou's mouth, and he pushed forward. Hiss! The sword stabbed through Yang Ye's chest. It was Heaven Executor. Mou wasn't holding an ordinary sword. He was holding one of the sharpest swords in the world, Heaven Executor. As soon as it stabbed into Yang Ye's body, a frenzied smile appeared on the corners of Mou's mouth, because Heaven Executor was the most destructive sword in the world. Of course, the ordinary sword and justice were excluded. Once Heaven Executor entered the body, death was guaranteed, because its powerful energy could destroy all vitality. However, Mou's smile hadn't stretched completely when it froze. Yang Yi didn't retreat, and he pressed forward instead, allowing Heaven Executor to pierce through his body. A moment later, he'd grabbed Mou by the throat, and he just lifted him up like that. Yang Yi had an extremely ferocious expression on his face. He suddenly pulled Mou toward him, and then he raised his knee to strike Mou's chin. Bam! In an instant, Mou's chin and half his face was blasted into bits. Heng Wangu was about to attack, but he suddenly stopped. Heaven Executor suddenly shot out of Yang Ye's body and slashed at his throat. Yang Yi frowned slightly. He released Mou, and then he turned around and swung his sword. Bang! Heaven Executor was instantly blasted away. Meanwhile, Mou was already over 1 kilometer away. Mou waved his hand, and Heaven Executor flew back into his grasp. He gazed fiercely at Yang Yi. Ha ha! Yang Yi, do you see that? Heaven Executor has acknowledged me as its master. It's willing to accept me as its master. Ha ha! Heaven Executor had acknowledged him as its master. Yang Yi glanced at his stomach. At this moment, a strand of mysterious energy was devouring his stomach. The energy of Heaven Executor. After a moment of silence, Yang Yi suddenly appeared before Mou. The latter's expression changed as he pressed his sword against his forehead. A moment later, countless rays of sword energy swept out from him. However, along with a swing of Yang Ye's sword, the sword energy was completely obliterated. At this moment, Yang Yi was in his demonic sword Dao state, so even an old geezer like Heng Wangu didn't dare to underestimate him at all. Along with the sword energy being dispersed, a sword pressed against Mou's throat. Meanwhile, Heaven Executor had only been lifted, and it was still a distance away from Yang Ye's throat. Mou's expression was extremely unsightly. Meanwhile, a voice suddenly resounded in Yang Ye's mind. Can you give him to me? If you agree, I can help you repulse your enemies. Yang Yi looked up at the sky. I don't need your damn help. As soon as he said that, he twisted his sword. Hiss! Mou's head flew up into the air. Right at the instant Mou's head flew up into the air, his soul actually left his body and shot toward the sky. He was trying to flee. A sword shot up into the air and pierced his soul. Mou's soul stopped there, and he stared blankly ahead. Yang Yi waved his right hand, and a sword returned to his grasp. It was past life. Yang Yi didn't pay any attention to Mou and gazed at his stomach instead. The hole there was healing rapidly. It was naturally thanks to Snowy. If he was an ordinary person, he would definitely die from being stabbed by Heaven Executor. But Yang Yi was different. He had the best profound energy in the world, and he had an endless supply of them too. Unless someone sliced off his head and destroyed his soul, he would be impossible to kill. Mou just stared blankly at the starry sky in the distance. He raised his right hand slowly as if he wanted to say something. However, past life energy was ceaselessly destroying him. He didn't have Snowy or past life energy, so he was helpless to resist it. He could only wait for death to arrive. Yang Yi looked up at the sky and tightened his grip on his sword. His gaze was very calm, but the vicious aura and killing intent he emanated was extremely violent. If Tu dared to try and save Mou, he would kill Mou immediately. He was no match for her, he was absolutely no match for her. But if she tried to save Mou, then he would fight her no matter what. He was ready to risk it all if she tried to bully him like that. Hung Wangu glanced at the boundless starry sky and surprisingly didn't attack. Mou's soul grew more and more ethereal. In the end, he suddenly roared madly with laughter that reverberated through space. As he laughed and laughed, Mou vanished from Yang Yi and Hung Wangu's vision. Tu didn't show herself even at the moment he fully vanished. Meanwhile, Heaven Executor suddenly shook and released a slightly sorrowful sword howl. After that, it shot up into the air. Suddenly, Yang Yi appeared before Heaven Executor, and it slashed at him. A vicious grin appeared on Yang Ye's lips. It was no match for him when it was wielded in the hands of Mou, so how dare it attack him when it wasn't wielded by anyone. Yang Yi swung past life. Bam! Heaven Executor was blasted away, and then Yang Yi chased after it. It planned to counterattack, but Yang Yi grabbed it. Bang! A wave of sword energy rippled out from the sword, but Yang Yi casually slapped it into bits. After that, he tossed the sword into the primordial pagoda. Heaven Executor stabbed into the ascension platform. It was just about to fly into the air when a small paw descended on its hilt. It was Snowy. Snowy gazed at it indifferently, and her little face had a rare tinge of icy coldness. Heaven Executor used to be quite close to it. However, since it obtained a new sprite, and especially after it devoured the sword energy it had released in the past, it wasn't the same sword anymore. Snowy pondered deeply for a moment, and then she grabbed Heaven Executor with both paws. Meanwhile, countless strands of sword energy erupted from the sword with the intent of mincing Snowy into bits. Snowy squeezed down with her paws. In an instant, the sword energy was enveloped by Snowy's spirit energy, and then the sword started to tremble violently. Sword howls resounded incessantly from it. Sprite destruction. Snowy rarely used sprite destruction because it was very cruel, but she couldn't take it this time. Outside the primordial pagoda, Yang Yi gazed at Hung Wangu, and the latter raised his right hand slowly. In an instant, a beam of golden light enveloped him, and then a ray of golden light swept at Yang Yi. Yang Yi grinned, and his smile was quite ferocious. A moment later, a ray of sword energy flashed. Hiss! Everywhere it passed, space was fragile as paper and was instantly sliced open. Just like that, they collided in the most direct manner. Boom! Space shook, and then two figures were pushed back repeatedly. Yang Yi wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth, and then he stood up straight and closed his eyes slowly. The 5 swords behind Xianxia trembled, and then they shot up into the sky. At this moment, all the experts in battle looked toward the sky. The energy of the 5 elements. The energy of the 5 elements emanated by those 5 swords caused the expressions of the experts here to change drastically. Hung Wangu's eyes narrowed slightly as well, and there was an unprecedentedly solemn expression in them. Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly pointed his sword forward. Go! As soon as he gave the command, the 5 swords dived down from above, and the energy of the 5 elements they emanated started to tear apart everything around them. At this moment, all the other experts retreated and created space between them and the area Xianxia was fighting Hung Wangu at. That area was now their private battlefield. Meanwhile, other fierce battles were going on. And Nanjing and Zhuamu's battle, and Jian Wudi and Emperor Li's battle. At a point in space, afterimages and monstrous saber energy covered the area. Boom! Suddenly, the space there collapsed, and then 2 figures retreated by over 1 kilometer. Zhuamu was the first to stop, and he twisted his body slightly sideways before swinging his saber repeatedly. Hiss! 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 The saber energy rippled at a Nanjing like waves. And Nanjing had an indifferent expression on her face as she hurled the spear forward. At the same time, she leaped up and followed it. Meanwhile, Jian Wudi and Emperor Li had stopped fighting. They were standing in confrontation from afar. Emperor Li sized up Jian Wudi, and then he glanced at his body. His body was covered in sharp sword energy. Emperor Li slowly clenched his fists, but he didn't attack. He looked to the side, and he could see the entire situation in the surroundings. Based on the current situation, the end world clearly didn't have an advantage. Emperor Li's eyes narrowed slightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Meanwhile, Jian Wudi suddenly said, I'm afraid the end world is trying to drag you into a trap. Emperor Li gazed at Jian Wudi, and the latter chuckled. No matter what they promised you, it seems they can't even keep themselves safe. Moreover, I'm sure you've realized that killing Xianxia will drag you into a vortex that involves destiny. You're strong, and so long as you don't go too far, destiny can't do anything to you. But showing yourself now, heh. Emperor Li replied indifferently. If they can show themselves, they would be here by now. Since they haven't, it's obvious that they are being kept busy by something. Right? Jian Wudi nodded. Then shall we continue? Jian Wudi wasn't someone who liked to rely on words to win a battle. However, Emperor Li was quite hesitant. Meanwhile, a few sword howls resounded from afar. Both of them looked over, and they saw 5 flying swords madly attacking Hung Wangu. 5 element swords. Besides that, Xianxia was ceaselessly suppressing Hung Wangu with his own attacks. Emperor Li's face fell from the sight of this. Xianxia had the upper hand. Once Xianxia defeated Hung Wangu, the situation would be instantly turned around. If Xianxia and Jian Wudi joined forces, killing him wouldn't be very difficult either. Jian Wudi's face remained indifferent, but he was quite shocked inside. Xianxia's attacks were quite unusual, and they felt quite dangerous even to him. But how old was Xianxia? At the same time, he felt a little worried. Xianxia's sword Dao was very demonic, and it wasn't a righteous one. Boom! Suddenly, the golden statue behind Hung Wangu was slashed into bits, and the latter retreated over 1 kilometer to create distance between himself and Xianxia. Xianxia didn't stop. He stomped his right foot down and shot forward while 5 swords followed by his side. Hung Wangu stared at Xianxia and clenched his fists slowly. A wave of powerful energy was rapidly converging around him. Meanwhile, Jian Wudi's face changed slightly as he hurriedly said, "Watch out!" He was about to take action when a wave of aura pressed down upon him. Jian Wudi gazed at Emperor Li and spoke angrily, "If you want to fight, then let's fight." He flicked countless rays of sword energy at Emperor Li. Emperor Li grunted coldly and charged at Jian Wudi. Meanwhile, Hung Wangu squatted down partially and clenched both his fists. Countless strands of energy converged incessantly into his arms before flowing into his fists. Meanwhile, Xianxia arrived. Xianxia swung his sword. The 5 swords slashed down with him. 6 swords descended, Hung Wangu closed his eyes slowly, fell silent for a moment, and then raised both his hands and slammed his fists forward. Boom! Boom! A ray of golden light instantly enveloped Hung Wangu. At the same time, a wave of destructive energy erupted from his fists like a volcano. Bang! 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 The 5-element swords that led the charge were blasted away, but Yang Yi forcefully endured the energy. However, it was really too strong. Hung Wangu moved forward incessantly while Yang Yi was pushed back incessantly, and blood kept seeping out from his mouth. Moreover, he felt like his internal organs had cracked open. Yang Yi was pushed over 3 kilometers back. He stomped his right foot down and stopped himself, but the space behind him was instantly obliterated. Suddenly, Hung Wangu slammed another punch forward. His countenance instantly turned ghastly pale when he did this. Obviously, he'd used some sort of secret technique. However, this punch was much more terrifying than any other punch from before. Yang Ye's expression changed when he sensed the terrifying force contained within Hung Wangu's punch, but he couldn't dodge it at all. The punch covered the space in an area of 300 m around him. He had no choice but to go head-on against it. Yang Yi took his sword in both hands while his profound energy surged madly into the sword. At the same time, he activated the sword domain and slaughter domain. Both domains overlapped. Yang Yi shouted with fury as he swung the sword. Bang! Yang Yi and Hung Wangu were blasted away. As he flew backward, Yang Ye's body started to crack open inch by inch and blood sprayed incessantly from him. Meanwhile, Hung Wangu's body was splitting open inch by inch as well. However, unlike Yang Yi, his body was being sliced open by sword energy. It didn't take long for them to stop their figures. As soon as he stopped himself, Yang Yi looked up at Hung Wangu. His physical injuries were healing at a visible rate, but Hung Wangu didn't have that ability. Hung Wangu cracked a smile. I've lost in recovery. Yang Yi didn't waste his breath and just charged at Hung Wangu. Admitting defeat? If that worked, he would have done that. Unfortunately, the fight between him and the End World would only end when one party died. The End World would never let him go unless they were annihilated. Similarly, he would never spare them while he was alive. Hung Wangu closed his eyes slowly when he saw Yang Yi charge at him, and then he clenched his right fist again. This time, his face was pale like a corpse, and his veins even bulged up. His secret technique was at its limits. If he couldn't stop this attack, he would die, and even if he did stop it, he would still die. It was a hopeless situation. While it was hopeless, Hung Wangu still remained composed. He disregarded life and death a long time ago. Right when Hung Wangu was about to launch the attack, something unexpected occurred. The space before him suddenly twisted into a strange vortex, and then a pitch-black hand emerged from there before slamming down at Yang Yi. At this moment, Yang Ye's sword had just descended, but it only descended halfway before Yang Yi noticed to his astonishment that a wave of powerful energy had stopped his sword. Yang Ye's expression changed drastically, and he knew that the situation was bad. He wanted to retreat, but the pitch-black hand suddenly tapped at it. This tap struck the tip of his sword. Bang! Yang Yi was blasted over 10 kilometers away. The black hand didn't attack again and just returned to the spatial rift. However, a voice resounded in Hung Wangu's mind. Retreat. As soon as the voice finished speaking, a 300 m long rift appeared by Hung Wangu's side. Hung Wangu didn't hesitate to glance at the others. Retreat. Meanwhile, Zhuamu returned to Hung Wangu's side, and there was a bloody hole in his chest. At the same time, and Nanjing returned to Yang Ye's side, and there was a very long cut on her face. It could be said that it had practically destroyed her face. However, and Nanjing didn't become ugly from that. Conversely, it gave her a unique bearing. The others on Yang Ye's side stopped as well because Yang Yi was in bad shape. Yang Ye's entire arm was mangled like it had been blasted with a bomb, and even the bones within were visible. Besides that, his entire body was like a porcelain jar that had fallen to the ground. While his body hadn't shattered, he was on the verge of it. That last attack had been absolutely powerful. Fortunately, he had snowy spirit energy and primordial violet energy. Otherwise, he would probably die from such injuries. The experts from the end world entered the spatial rift in succession. Once all of them had entered, Hung Wangu finally entered it as well. But he suddenly turned to look at Yang Yi right before he went through. "You're formidable indeed." He entered the spatial rift. A short while later, the rift vanished and everything here returned to normal. It was like the rift had never been there. Yen Wu and the past life clan's patriarch went over to Yang Yi, and they heaved sighs of relief when they noticed that he was still alive. They'd wagered everything on Yang Yi, so if he died, all their hard work would be for nothing. Meanwhile, Jian Wudi and Qing Xian went over to Yang Yi. Jian Wudi frowned when he saw the horrifying state Yang Yi was in, but just a short while later, everyone including Jian Wudi was stunned. Because Yang Yi was recovering rapidly. His injuries were healing extremely rapidly at a rate that seemed unusual to everyone here. Just like that, it didn't even take an hour for Yang Yi to be almost fully healed. Yang Yi stood up. He was healed now, so he glanced at the people here. Thank you. If they hadn't assisted him, just he and Nanjing alone would have never been able to defeat the end world. The facts proved that fighting as a group was much better. Yenwu smiled. You've helped us tremendously too, so don't mention it. Just let us know if you need help again. He paused for a moment and continued. Do you know who attacked you at the end? That last attack. Everyone here had solemn expressions on their faces. Yang Yi had almost been crushed by that hand. Yang Ye's face gradually became solemn as well, because it felt too terrifying even to him. After his strength improved tremendously, he'd only felt like that when facing two, and the owner of that hand had clearly not used their full strength. It could be said that if that expert showed themselves, his side would definitely be incapable of stopping that expert. But that expert hadn't done anything. Obviously, that expert was worried about something. Yang Yi looked up at the sky. What was that fellow afraid of? Obviously, it was destiny. Yenwu said, Brother Yang, I'm afraid this matter requires some planning. The past life clan's patriarch nodded as well. Indeed. It's best if we don't act rashly until we figure out the strength and identity of that mysterious expert who's supporting the end world. Based on the situation just now, that mysterious expert's strength was clearly above all of them. Yang Yi smiled. I know. As he spoke, he glanced at them. Everyone, all of you should head home for now. Remember to try your best to stay in touch, and it's best if you establish teleportation formations to help each other when necessary. Of course, feel free to contact me too. The past life clan's patriarch and Yen Wu exchanged glances, and they nodded. Wu said, Brother Yang will be leaving now. Take care. Both of them and the members of their clans vanished into the sky. Yang Yi gazed at the Yang clan's Grand Elder who was still standing there. Grand Elder? Do you have something to say? The Grand Elder nodded but was quite hesitant. Yang Yi asked, What is it? The Grand Elder sighed softly. Our ancestor protected the clan with her life and helped our clan become acknowledged by the universe. However, our Yang clan suffered a terrible decline later on. Especially after she vanished, the clan has been in decline with each passing year. He glanced at Yang Yi and said, We've told the clan that you're a member of the Yang clan, and we want you to become our clan's representative to rekindle the confidence of our clan's young generation. No, it's the confidence of our entire clan. Yang Yi fell silent. The Grand Elder said, If you don't want to, Yang Yi smiled. It's fine. So long as you're not afraid that I'll drag down the Yang clan. The Grand Elder was visibly relieved, and he smiled. No matter what kind of trouble you're in, the Yang clan is willing to face it with you. I'm absolutely sincere when I say that. Yang Ye's bloodline wasn't the pure bloodline of the Yang clan. But so what? So long as someone was a genius, all of that didn't matter. Moreover, strictly speaking, Yang Yi was a descendant of the Yang clan. While his bloodline was diluted, all that matters was that he did possess the Yang clan's bloodline, even if it was an absolutely diluted version, because it represented that he was part of their clan. Strength. Strength was always the most important at any time. If one lacks strength, even what isn't a problem may become a problem. but there would be no problems with sufficient strength. A short while later, the Grand Elder left with the other members of the Yang clan. Only Tsangmu, Shaji, Jianwudi, and Qingxian remained here. Jianwudi glanced at the place where the experts of the End World had entered the spatial rift and said, "They aren't weak. Moreover, while they fled in defeat, their overall strength is intact. You must be careful." Yang Yi nodded. "I'll get someone to investigate." Jiang Wudi patted Yang Yi on the shoulder. "Your strength is pretty good, but your sword Dao is an extreme type, so just be careful. Don't let the sword control you. And kid, you're more like a sly cultivator than a sword cultivator. You have so many tricks up your sleeves." Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Jian Wudi chuckled and vanished into the sky with Qingxian. Yang Yi shook his head, smiled, and gazed at Songmu and Shaji. Songmu said, "How's our master?" Yang Yi spoke softly, "Don't worry, I'll find her." He naturally hadn't forgotten about Qi Bitian and Tianxiu. It was the thing he was most worried about right now as well. After all, the strongest form of destiny was much more terrifying than the End World. They nodded and soundlessly vanished. Once they left, Yang Yi turned around, and a woman walked over in his direction. 2. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, tightened his grip on his sword, and prepared to attack at any moment. It wasn't her main body, it was just a clone. 2 walked over to Yang Yi and just gazed at him. Yang Ye's face remained indifferent, and he looked her straight in the eyes. A short while later, 2 chuckled. "You couldn't even give me that bit of face?" Yang Yi shook his head. "From the very beginning, he has tried to kill me multiple times, and you never stopped him. But you stopped me when I try to kill him. What would you do in my place?" She glanced at him and looked off into the distance. It was where Mou's soul had dispersed. She just looked there for a long time. In the end, she spoke softly. "I should say that I brought about his death. I made him possess ambition that far surpassed his strength." Yang Yi remained silent. She'd brought up Mou and personally trained him, so it was impossible for her to feel nothing. However, Mou may have disappointed her. 2 continued, "I gave him a chance before this. Heaven Executor going to him was that chance. Unfortunately, his heart was still so full of envy and hatred." She gazed at Yang Yi and said, "He wasn't bad once, but he unfortunately lost himself." Her figure gradually turned ethereal. Yang Yi remained silent. He wasn't interested in the relationship between Mou and Tuesday. His mind was on crushing the End World and the strongest form of destiny. Suddenly, 2 asked, "You've met our strongest form?" Yang Yi gazed at her and nodded. 2 spoke indifferently. "Looks like she didn't acknowledge you." Yang Yi smiled. "It doesn't matter. If I have someone strong to rely on, I will. But if I don't, it doesn't matter. I'll just rely on myself." 2 gazed at him for a long time. In the end, she shook her head slightly. If he could think that way, he wouldn't have suffered such a fate. She gazed at Yang Yi and continued, "I'll give 3rd and 4th some face, and I'll give you this warning. Since you failed to receive her acknowledgement, don't meet her again. Especially when you can't defeat her." Her figure turned ethereal once she finished speaking. It didn't take long for 2 to vanish completely from Yang Ye's field of vision. Yang Yi moved his gaze away and withdrew the transmission rock. A short while later, a voice came from within it. "Congratulations, Brother Yang." Yang Yi spoke indifferently. "What is there to be happy about?" The voice chuckled. "You've defeated the End World. Is that not reason enough?" Yang Yi shook his head. "They aren't really defeated, right? The End World seems to have a mysterious expert. Do you know about that existence?" His expression became solemn at this point because he still felt a lingering fear when he thought about that expert. The voice on the other side of the transmission stone fell silent for some time before it said, "I don't know. We're investigating as well. But from now on, we may have to go into hiding. Because Hung Wangu seems to have noticed something." Yang Yi nodded. "Be careful. Contact me if you need my help." The voice chucked, "Then I'll thank you in advance. Take care, Brother Yang." The transmission stone fell silent. Yang Yi put the transmission stone away, glanced at the surroundings, and then vanished on the spot. Around an hour later, he stopped somewhere and entered the primordial pagoda. On the ascension platform, Yang Yi went over to Snowy, and she passed a sword to Yang Yi. Heaven Executor. Yang Yi took it. At this moment, it didn't have a consciousness anymore. Snowy had destroyed its existing sword sprite. It was a brand new Heaven Executor now. Meanwhile, Snowy pointed at herself and pointed at the sword. She was saying that she could foster a new sprite for it. Yang Yi rubbed her little head and smiled. All right, but don't make it like the last one. Snowy hurriedly nodded. Even she hated the previous sword sprite in Heaven Executor. Yang Yi glanced at the sword. If it didn't have a new sprite, its strength would decline tremendously. Fortunately, he had Snowy, so fostering a new sprite wasn't an issue at all. Most importantly, Heaven Executor could be merged with Great Unknown and Past Life. Yang Yi put his swords away and went to Aria's abode with Snowy. At this moment, she'd changed again. Now, the horns on her head were dark gold in color. Besides that, her tail had changed too. There was a mysterious dark golden glow flowing through her tail. It wasn't just her tail. The mysterious dark golden glow was often flowing throughout her body. Besides that, Aria's aura was growing, and it was so powerful that even his heart palpitated slightly. At the same time that he was shocked, Yang Yi felt quite a bit of bitterness. Aria could become so terrifying just by eating 2 inner core fragments, but he'd done so much to get where he was. Actually, it was normal. Aria was regaining her past strength, but he didn't have that. Yang Yi and Snowy stayed with Aria for a while, and then Yang Yi went to a Nanjing's abode on his own. She was seated cross-legged at the center of the house, and she opened her eyes upon sensing Yang Ye's arrival. Yang Yi sized up a Nanjing and spoke softly. Are you all right? She nodded. I'm fine. Yang Yi nodded slightly. Meanwhile, she spoke softly. That saber cultivator is very strong. Zhuamu. Yang Yi asked, what is it? And Nanjing said, I can sense that he may have been holding back. He was hiding his strength. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. You're saying that he didn't use his full strength? And Nanjing nodded. He's hiding it. I almost pushed him to his limits many times, but every single time that happened, I would sense danger. She gazed at Yang Yi and continued, be careful when you encounter him next time. He is holding back, and if it isn't to take you by surprise, it's to take destiny by surprise. Yang Yi nodded. The end world held back too. He gazed at a Nanjing and smiled. You're not leaving anymore, right? She nodded. Of course. She would never leave now, because it was when Yang Yi needed help the most. Yang Yi wasn't just being targeted by the end world. The strongest form of destiny wanted to kill him too. That was a practically unmatched existence. After chatting with a Nanjing for a while, Yang Yi left the primordial pagoda. Meanwhile, Snowy remained in the pagoda to nurture Heaven Executor's sprite. 2 hadn't taken Heaven Executor, and its precious sprite was gone. So Yang Yi would naturally not give up the sword. Once he merged all 3 of them, their strength would definitely rise tremendously. Outside the primordial pagoda, Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings. Suddenly, a voice came from the transmission stone in his possession. Eternal Kingdom has been breached. Eternal Kingdom has been breached. Yang Yi frowned slightly, and the voice continued. The desolate race has entered the Eternal Kingdom, so the powers that were indecisive before have joined them. Now, the entire universe is madly taking over Eternal Kingdom. It's in chaos now. Yang Yi spoke solemnly. The desolate race has help? The voice replied. It may be linked to you. Yang Yi was puzzled. The voice continued. Firstly, you took the entire Sprite Palace. Of course, even if the Sprite Palace was still there, they wouldn't be able to change a thing. The real reason is that you killed the experts from the origin world, and you're keeping the end world busy too. So, the Eternal Kingdom has no one to help them. Without the origin world and end world, the Eternal Kingdom can't find help from anyone else. After all, they rejected the entire universe, so no one likes them. The only forces that may help them were the origin world and end world. but one of them was annihilated by you while the other is being kept busy by you. Yang Yi shook his head. After all, how could that be his fault? The voice said, Eternal Kingdom can be said to have brought all of this onto themselves. Of course, if I'm being honest, if you didn't destroy the origin world and keep the end world busy now, Eternal Kingdom may not be annihilated. After all, the Eternal Kingdom has a very long history, and it has a divine vein, so they just have to pay a certain price and they would be able to make the experts from both those places help them. Yang Yi shook his head. Let's not talk about that anymore. Anyway, have you found the Soul Sect? The Soul Sect. He'd never forgotten how they'd hunted him wherever he went. There were things that he hadn't gotten revenge for in the past, but it didn't represent that he'd given up on getting even. Now that he'd repulsed the end world, it was time to get even. The voice replied, I have. They are in the Eternal Kingdom. The Soul Sect's master has returned to the Eternal Kingdom too. Yang Yi asked, Didn't he join the end world? The voice replied, He did, but his subordinates remained in Eternal Kingdom. It's impossible for their entire organization to join the end world. The end world only wants him. Now that the desolate race is attacking, he chose to return. Yang Yi looked up at the sky and said, It's time to get even for some things. The voice added, Besides that, those disciples who left your ancient sword sect are all fine and well. However, some of them returned to Eternal Kingdom, and they are fighting the desolate race with the Eternal Kingdom. According to my investigations, their family is still in the Eternal Kingdom. Yang Yi nodded. Are they still alive? The voice replied, Yes, they are. Yang Yi looked up at the sky. He'd planned to just go beyond the 9th layer of space, but now it seemed like he had to return to Eternal Kingdom. Yang Yi said, I'll leave investigating the mysterious expert supporting the end world to you. Besides that, I'm counting on you to complete my other requests. Contact me at any time if you need anything. The voice chuckled. We're on the same boat now. If anything happens to you, my fate won't be any better. So, I hope we work well together. Yang Yi smiled. Me too. Yang Yi vanished on the spot. Favorite Eternal Kingdom. At this moment, Eternal Kingdom had fallen, and the desolate race's army had entered its borders. The entire world was in a mess. Of course, there were tons of corpses and blood all over. The War Dimension. The War Dimension was the only place in the Eternal Kingdom that hadn't been conquered by the joint forces of the desolate race and the entire universe. Besides fostering geniuses, this place existed as a backup plan for the Eternal Kingdom. Countless powerful formations were gathered here, and they had been ceaselessly reinforced for a very, very long time. Now, they were extremely terrifying. Could be said that even killing peak Destiny Realm experts wasn't difficult for these formations. Moreover, after they gave up their territory and shrunk their line of defense by converging all their experts here, and coupled with the formations here, it was the only way they could stop the desolate race's advance. However, Eternal Kingdom had fallen. Now, the War Dimension had temporarily stopped the desolate race, but if they received no assistance, it was only a matter of time before the desolate race got them. After all, the desolate race had surrounded the War Dimension. In the War Dimension, all of them had converged in the city, and they could see countless formations circulating in the sky above. Outside the War Dimension, the desolate race and the experts from all over the universe were gathered out here. They would naturally not spare the War Dimension. Once they eliminated the War Dimension, the history of this universe would be rewritten. Huang Ying stood in the sky outside, and the Undying Race's patriarch, Huang Buer, and Huang Xian were by his side. Besides that, countless other experts from all over the universe were behind him. Once they found out that Eternal Kingdom had been breached, the experts of the universe stopped watching and rushed over with the intention of benefiting from the scraps of the war. Huang Ying didn't refuse it because Eternal Kingdom still had the War Dimension, and it had to be eliminated to put an end to all future troubles. Now that these people were here, he was naturally happy to welcome them. After all, he had countless more cannon fodder to use. In the sky, Huang Xian suddenly asked, "Shall we begin?" Huang Ying gazed at Huang Buer, and the latter spoke solemnly. "These formations are very powerful. It will probably take a long time to break through them. Huang Ying smiled. It's fine. We have time. Huang Buer was about to speak when a ray of sword energy descended in the distance. The expressions of everyone here changed. The forces behind Huang Ying were about to attack, but he stopped them. It was because the figure in the distance belonged to Yang Yi. Huang Ying, Huang Buer, and Huang Xian's expressions were quite unsightly at the sight of Yang Yi. Was Yang Yi here to help? If Yang Yi was here to help, they would be in big trouble. Yang Yi was fighting the end world right now. But even the end world couldn't kill him. Their expressions grew increasingly unsightly as they thought about it. Yang Yi glanced at Huang Ying's group, and then he walked toward the war dimension. However, he stopped a short moment later and gazed at Huang Ying. Can you spare the sprites of this world? Huang Ying gazed at Yang Yi. Yes. He would naturally not refuse. Only the end world could stop Yang Yi now. While the desolate race had practically won the war against the Eternal Kingdom, the situation would instantly turn around if Yang Yi took the Eternal Kingdom's side. So, the desolate race didn't dare to refuse Yang Ye's request. Fortunately, it wasn't an excessive one either. Yang Yi nodded and walked toward the war dimension. Once he got close to it, the formations there instantly activated. At the same time, a barrier appeared before Yang Yi. Yang Yi withdrew Great Unknown, and then he passed through the barrier. All barriers were nothing before Great Unknown. Huang Ying and the others were stunned by the sight of this. He got through just like that? Just like that? They exchanged glances and saw bewilderment in each other's eyes. In the war dimension, a ray of sword energy suddenly descended before the gates of War City. At this moment, countless experts appeared above the city walls, and they seemed like they were facing a formidable enemy when they saw Yang Ye's figure. Meanwhile, Lu Yuan appeared before Yang Yi. Lu Yuan glanced at Yang Yi with a rather complicated expression on her face. This fellow before her had once been a part of the war dimension. If the Eternal Kingdom hadn't treated Yang Yi like that, Yang Yi would still be part of the war dimension, and the situation would be different. Yang Yi said, "Tell the Soul Sect's master to come here." The Soul Sect's master. Lu Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly. Yang Yi, are you trying to strike us when we're down? Yang Yi shook his head. Senior Lu Yuan, am I doing something like that? I don't think so. Tell him to come out here, and we'll resolve our enmity on our own. She spoke solemnly. Yang Yi, Eternal Kingdom is already in this state. If you act against us, you'll be pushing us to death. Yang Yi smiled. A long time ago, didn't Eternal Kingdom do the same to me? Lu Yuan fell silent. Yang Yi shook his head. Allow me to be honest. Even if you win, they still must die. He looked at the city. The patriarchs of the various clans and the Eternal Lord, all your lives are mine. The Soul Sect's master too. Will you come out yourself? Or shall I kill my way in? Lu Yuan spoke solemnly. Yang Yi, can't you give some consideration for the past? Yang Yi gazed at Lu Yuan. Of course, you've helped me in the past and I will never forget that. But kindness and enmity are two different things. I must kill them, especially the Soul Sect's master. As for the Eternal Lord and the others, I can give you face and kill them in a month from now. If they fall in battle, I'll let bygones be bygones. If they survive, I'll send them off on their way. Lu Yuan's expression was extremely unsightly. Oppressive. Yang Yi was being oppressive right now. A moment of silence ensued, and then Lu Yuan gazed at him. Yang Yi, I know you're extremely strong, and none of us are a match for you in single combat. But we have countless experts here, and the formations from years ago. You won't have any advantage in a head-on collision with us. The Soul Sect was part of the Eternal Kingdom right now. If she agreed to Yang Ye's demands, wouldn't it disappoint countless? Yang Yi chuckled. Lu Yuan, you should be thankful that it isn't someone else who said that to me. Otherwise, I'd bury this war dimension right now. But as I've mentioned earlier, I owe you, and I don't want to repay that with evil. He summoned Snowy as he spoke. Lu Yuan turned pale when she saw Snowy. Yang Yi spoke coldly. She could even eliminate all the End World's formations with ease. So shall I ask her to undo all the formations you have here? The good sprite, Lu Yuan closed her eyes slowly. She knew that the little fellow could get everyone here killed. Because once the formations were gone, the desolate race's army would attack, and everyone here would die. As for their formations were useless before the little fellow. The war dimension had no right to negotiate with Yang Yi. Suddenly, a black shadow appeared before Lu Yuan, the Soul Sect's master. Lu Yuan was about to speak when he shook his head. Lu Yuan, this is between us, so we'll deal with it ourselves. You can go back inside. She gazed at Yang Yi. Yang Yi, can you really not make an exception? Yang Yi shook his head. I'm repaying you by not annihilating the entire Eternal Kingdom. Lu Yuan, you know how the Eternal Kingdom treated me and the Ancient Sword Sect. So, don't ask me to make exceptions because they never did that for me and the Ancient Sword Sect. Lu Yuan fell silent for a moment and left. She knew that nothing she said would change anything. It was time for the Eternal Kingdom to pay for what it had done. Of course, she was thankful that she'd helped Yang Yi in the past. If it wasn't for that, Yang Yi would probably not even waste his breath on her. But she felt it was a terrible pity too, because Yang Yi had once been part of the war dimension. Once she entered the city, the Soul Sect's master gazed at Yang Yi and smiled. Time changed? Huh. Yang Yi shook his head. Sorry. I'm not interested in wasting my breath on you. Yang Yi vanished on the spot. The Soul Sect's master's eyes narrowed slightly, and he waved his right hand. The super divine treasure, the Soul All, appeared before him, and it spun madly. In an instant, countless strands of soul energy rippled out from the All. At the same time, his entire body started to burn. Soul ignition. He was very well aware that he had no chance. He'd been in the end world, so he knew how strong Yang Yi was. Only Hung Wangu and the other old geezers stood a chance against Yang Yi in single combat. So, he didn't hold back from the beginning. He didn't hold back at all. He planned to take Yang Yi down with him. If he risked everything, he may be able to escape with his life. But if he didn't, he would just be giving his life away. Meanwhile, Yang Yi arrived before him. Past life. The soul energy was instantly obliterated before past life. Past life was the bane of souls. In an instant, the soul energy was obliterated, and the sword stabbed against the All. Crack. The Soul All cracked open. Meanwhile, Yang Yi twisted his sword, and it stabbed at the Sword Sect's master who was standing behind the Soul All. The Soul Sect's master revealed a ferocious grin on his face, and then his soul suddenly expanded. Self-detonation. Suddenly, Yang Yi stomped his right foot down and flashed by like a ray of light. Hiss! The ear-piercing sound of something being sliced open resounded. A moment later, Yang Yi was behind the Soul Sect's master. There was a brief moment of silence before the Soul Sect's master turned ethereal and vanished. An instant kill. An absolutely instant kill without any chance to fight back. Yang Yi put his sword away and walked over to the city. Disciples of the ancient sword sect, come to me. Once Yang Yi said that, a few rays of light shot up into the air, and then 4 figures appeared nearby. They bowed to Yang Yi. Sect Master. He glanced at them. He recognized all of them. They were disciples of the sect, and Lu Yunxian was among them. Yang Yi asked, shall we leave? They exchanged glances and seemed to be visibly hesitant. A short while later, Lu Yunxian stepped forward and shook his head. Sect Master, we can't leave. Our families and loved ones are still here in the city. Yang Yi said, tell them to come with us. They were stunned by this. Leave together? Yang Yi nodded. I don't want to interfere in the Eternal Kingdom's business, but I have to take care of all of you. Both you and your loved ones have no hope of survival if you remain here. Tell them to come here and leave with us for somewhere else. They were quite hesitant. Yang Yi frowned slightly. All of you will die if you stay, so what are you hesitating for? Lu Yunxian replied, I'm afraid we're city. Yang Yi replied coldly. Would they dare to refuse? Lu Yunxian glanced at Yang Yi and smiled. All right, we'll get them. They excitedly entered the city again. Yang Yi looked up at the sky. Is the Yi clan here? An old man appeared before Yang Yi. It was the Yi clan's ancestor and Yi Jibei. The Yi clan's ancestor smiled. Long time no see. Yang Yi nodded slightly. Senior, I'm sure you're aware of the situation. Allow me to be honest, even if you can keep them out for a few dozen years, it's pointless, isn't it? The Yi clan's ancestor fell silent for a moment and said, I know, but I still can't leave. The Xing clan's patriarch fell in battle, and that old man from the Lu clan is seriously injured. We're lacking experts in the destiny realm. Yang Yi fell silent. Meanwhile, the old man added, besides that, so long as the end world and the other monstrous geniuses like you don't help the desolate race, it'll be very difficult for them to break their way in here. Furthermore, if my Yi clan's disciples are able to survive this danger, it will be very beneficial to them. So, I'm grateful for your kindness. Yang Yi nodded. I understand. He gazed at Yi Zhibei. If a day comes when War Dimension is breached and I'm still alive, send me a voice transmission. I'll come for you and your clan. The Yi clan's ancestor was overjoyed. While he had chosen to stay, it was a risky bet. If the Yi clan survived this hopeless situation, its forces would definitely become extremely terrifying. However, it was a very, very risky bet. After all, once War City was breached, the Yi clan would vanish from this world. Yet now, they had Xianxia's promise, so it represented that the Yi clan would survive even if Eternal Kingdom lost. How could he not feel overjoyed from that? Yi Zhibei was quite visibly moved as well. She glanced at Yang Yi and said, Thank you. This promise could truly be described as something that would save the Yi clan's life. Meanwhile, the others on the city walls had extremely complicated feelings in their hearts. The Yi clan received such treatment because it had chosen not to target Yang Yi. Regret. Especially the Xing clan. If they had made Xing Biqing stay, then perhaps their clan would receive such treatment. Unfortunately, they had made her leave. Now that they'd lost her, they had no right to speak to Yang Yi. Yang Yi wasn't the same Yang Yi who had been hunted by the entire Eternal Kingdom. Meanwhile, Lu Yunxian and the others led a group out of the city. No one in the city stopped them. Even if they wanted to, they didn't dare to. Both the Desolate Race and Eternal Kingdom didn't dare to go head-on against Yang Yi. Yang Yi ignored the experts on the city walls and gazed at Yi Zhibei. Farewell. He shot up into the air with Lu Yunxian and the others. The Yi clan's ancestor sighed softly as he watched Yang Ye's group leave. Zhibei? We're lucky that we didn't choose to go against him. Yi Zhibei's lips curled into quite a moving smile. Outside the War Dimension, a group of experts surrounded Yang Ye's group upon seeing them emerge from the War Dimension. However, they immediately retreated upon noticing that it was Yang Yi. This fellow couldn't be stopped, otherwise it would lead to trouble. Yang Yi glanced at them and walked away. Suddenly, Huang Ying said, Brother Yang. Yang Yi stopped, and he continued, Can you help us? Just this once. So long as Yang Yi summoned Snowy, these formations would vanish in an instant. It could be said that the little fellow just had to wave her tiny paw, and everyone in the War Dimension would die, and the Desolate Race would truly win. At that time, the Desolate Race would be the new master of the Eternal Kingdom, and it would set the rules of this place. Yang Yi glanced at Huang Ying and shook his head. No, Yang Yi vanished into the sky with the others. Huang Ying's face was calm because he'd expected that answer. Meanwhile, Huang Buer suddenly said, He's a very unstable element. Huang Xian nodded. He's too overbearing. The way he treated us is an insult to our race, and the descendants of our race should never forget this humiliation. Yang Yi had openly entered the War Dimension and taken people from there, and that was undoubtedly a form of disregard to the Desolate Race. Moreover, he'd even threatened them to not harm the sprites of this world. It could be said that he was openly disregarding them. When had they ever been insulted like this? Suddenly, Huang Buer shook his head. Don't think like that. Huang Xian gazed at Huang Buer, and the latter spoke solemnly. If our patriarch was here, then perhaps he would have to consider our patriarch. However, our patriarch is gone, so it's best if we don't offend him. Not to mention us, even the end world wasn't able to get the upper hand against him. But that's fine because he has gotten himself swept into the enmity between the end world and destiny, and one side will die in the end. Perhaps Yang Yi will vanish from this world soon. Huang Xian nodded. An outcome had to be decided between Yang Yi and those extraordinary figures. Their job was to watch from the sidelines and reap the rewards. Meanwhile, Huang Ying suddenly said, "Let's do this. Once we're done here, we will have nothing to worry about." As soon as he said that, countless experts charged at the war dimension. At the same time, countless formations were activated within the war dimension. The combined strength of these formations wasn't any weaker to the formations that the End World had set up that day. However, the desolate race clearly had a strategy to deal with it. It was to use numbers against it. They planned to exhaust the war dimension to death. Meanwhile, Yang Yi stopped in outer space. Lu Yunxian and the others bowed to Yang Yi, and then the others behind them bowed as well. Yang Yi could be said to have saved their lives. Yang Yi shook his head slightly. It was nothing. He glanced at them and continued, "What do you plan to do now?" Lu Yunxian spoke solemnly. "We plan to leave for another world. The spirit energy there may be inferior, but it's safe, at least. I think we can return once everything in the Eternal Kingdom calms down." Yang Yi thought for a moment and nodded. "All right. Eternal Kingdom wasn't very peaceful now, and staying was too dangerous." Lu Yunxian hesitated for a moment and said, "Sect Master, how are things between you and the End World?" Yang Yi smiled. "Don't worry about me. Just take care of yourselves." Lu Yunxian nodded because they really were incapable of interfering in Yang Ye's problems. If they did, they would only be causing trouble for him. Lu Yunxian seemed to have thought of something at this point, and he added, "Right, some of the others started their own sects in other worlds. Even though they are only small sects, I think it's quite good. Besides that, all of them are using the ancient sword sect's name." He gazed at Yang Yi and continued, "All of them built a statue for you, and they tell their disciples that you are the true sect master." Yang Yi shook his head and smiled. "Seriously?" Lu Yunxian smiled. "Perhaps many disciples of the ancient sword sect will come to the Eternal Kingdom. At that time, they will hear about you. However, they are quite worried." Yang Yi asked, "What are they worried about?" Lu Yunxian replied, "They are worried you won't be happy. However, they said that so long as you need something, they will come no matter where you are. Moreover, they will only acknowledge you as the sect master." Yang Yi hadn't abandoned the ancient sword sect in its time of need, and he'd protected it all the way. Moreover, they could be said to have gone through thick and thin with Yang Yi. So, the disciples of the ancient sword sect thought of Yang Yi as their one and only sect master. Yang Yi smiled and said, "I don't mind. If it's possible, contact them and tell them that establishing a sect is a good thing. However, I really don't want to see our disciples killing each other." Lu Yuntian replied solemnly, "Don't worry, sect master. We will never do that." Yang Yi nodded. He seemed to have thought of something and gazed at Lu Yunxian. "Are you thinking of establishing one too?" Lu Yunxian smiled embarrassedly. "We do plan to do that." Yang Yi nodded and smiled. "All right." He flicked a ray of white light into Lu Yunxian's forehead. Lu Yunxian was stunned. "What is that?" Yang Yi replied, "Some of the sword techniques I learned in the past and some of my comprehension and experience. I hope it'll be of help to all of you." Lu Yunxian was stunned for a moment, and then gave Yang Yi a deep and long bow. Yang Yi smiled. "Go on. I hope we'll meet again one day." Lu Yunxian nodded. "Take care, sect master." They turned around and left. Yang Yi watched them leave in silence.